I'm here in my office at St. Charles today for the first time in about 3 weeks. Last week, I ended up not needing to come by. One of my coworkers brought some things to my house. The week before that, I had taken off. So I think it's been 3 weeks since I physically came over here to the church. And as I was driving over, there were a fair number of cars on the road. But it's surreal driving through New Orleans. Some things are open, some things are closed. It has kind of a haunted feel. And as I was walking into the building, I started thinking about growing up evangelical in the 80s and 90s. And I remember going to another church in town, I think in Mobile. I think another church was showing that movie, that Left Behind movie that was before the Left Behind book. So this is like free Peretti and free pre whatever the other guy was. But it was the people wake up, the alarm clocks are going off, and the rapture has happened. And anyway, clearly like some old toxic theology that is not helpful that still haunts me somewhere deep in my psyche. But there's a little bit of that feeling like my desk is like I left it, and the plants are looking good, and the courtyard outside looks good, but something is not quite right. So that's where I am today. Weird intro to God Squad, but I just wanted to do kind of a check-in too of pastoral ministry is changing right now. I think I've shared a bunch in these 4 or 5 conversations that I feel like we have this American Protestant work ethic, this consumerist model of like we've got to produce. So there's been a real busyness to quarantine time that is almost hollow. There are times that it feels really hollow, like, oh, we're going to have this Zoom call just so we can say that we were on a Zoom call and saw each other. So this conversation with Emily Holladay today is increasingly interesting to me since we talked. I think we recorded this a couple of days ago. We didn't know each other before this call. We have mutual friends, so you'll see us getting to know each other in real time. And I didn't realize that in this, her first senior pastorate, she had only gotten started in January. So I've been thinking since we talked a couple of days ago about how ambitious my goals were for my first year here at St. Charles. And I made a point to write every single person in the congregation a letter. And I was going to, I did a survey, and we were really going to hit the ground running. And all of that was good and important groundwork, but it was really rooted in a congregation as doing, church as doing. And now that's been taken away from us, and we are left with the essence, which isn't about doing at all. It's completely about being. So I'm intrigued to watch Emily's first year in her pastorate develop, because all of those tricks and tools in our toolbox don't work right now. This is not about programs. This is not about doing. This is not about busyness. We are left only with the essence of our faith. And that's the part that intrigues me. That's the part that I want to stick with. There are so many things about Christianity, especially as it is known in America these days, that I'm just done with, not interested in. But boy, the essence. So I hope you hear some of that today in this conversation with Emily Holladay and a new episode of God Squad. Thanks for watching. Hi, well, it's good to meet you. I've certainly heard your name through Baptist Life. I guess CBF Life maybe is how I would have known you. And I tried to not look up too much information about you in advance so that we could really get to know each other on here. But I did see that you were also a Samford grad. Okay,
Yeah.
So my husband and I graduated in '99, so we were there before you were, before your time. But it's always fun to find folks who had that experience together. And you're in Maryland now?
I am. I'm in Bowie, Maryland, which is just outside of DC, kind of in between DC and Baltimore, sort of. And I'm the pastor at Village Baptist Church in Bowie. It's spelled like Bowie, like David Bowie, but it's pronounced Bowie.
Sure. How long have you been there?
Since January.
Oh, wow. Oh, geez. So this is brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And did you move there from Georgia? Were you in Georgia before?
I moved from Kentucky. So I was in Georgia for divinity school, and then I worked for CBF for a short time. And then I moved to Kentucky to become an associate pastor of a church in Louisville. And then now I'm pastor at Village.
Wow. Okay. So you just got there and just got started. And then within like 8 weeks, this began.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah, I
goodness.
think I had preached 7 times before we had the shutdown, something like that. Yeah.
Hey, did you have an installation service or anything like that? Or was it just full on, you're in it now?
Right. Yeah, no installation service. We were supposed to do that in May. And thankfully, we kind of had the foresight to go ahead because originally, so it was March 15th was the first Sunday that we were out. And we said we would be out for 2 Sundays and then reevaluate. But before that happened, before we could reevaluate, the governor put in place the executive order for stay at home.
Yeah.
So my installation service was supposed to be in May. And then we decided on the 15th, we said, let's just go ahead and postpone the installation service because even if we could have it, there are people we would want to be here who we're not sure would be able to travel.
Sure.
So now it's kind of on hold indefinitely. We were talking about maybe September because that would be kind of the anniversary of when I preached in View of a Call.
Yeah.
But who knows what life will even be looking like in September. So maybe I'll have an installation service on my 5-year anniversary.
So you can make the anniversaries big celebrations. Oh my gosh. Well, what was already in place? Was anything already in place for y'all to move online, or did you have to create all of that while you're also still unpacking a house?
Yeah, no, there was, I mean, we have been, doing audio online forever. So that was already in place before I got there, but we have not been set up to do live streaming or anything like that. So that was something that we had to do kind of on really short notice. So let's see, the 15th was the first Sunday that we were out, and we decided that on Thursday night before the service on the 15th. I mean, we had originally said, let's just be safe. Let's do the little like elbow bumps and all that. And then we just decided, things are ramping up too much. And so on the fly, we decided to do Periscope, which is Twitter's streaming service. Okay. I think mostly, I didn't make that decision. There were some of our worship leaders did, but I think mostly because people assume if you're doing Facebook Live that you have to have a Facebook account. And so we don't want to confuse people. Right. Periscope was something a lot of people hadn't heard of. And so it worked out. But, we were using a tripod and a iPhone in the sanctuary. And, so if we were to, pick up today and go back to worship, we would not have the setup to be able to live stream because we'd have to, again, like put the tripod with the camera with people sitting next to it, and so now we're doing it from my house. Okay. We're not live streaming though, we're pre-recording. So this banner behind me is one of the banners from the church. The former pastor, his wife, when they were getting ready to leave, asked everybody to bring, pieces of fabric of things that meant something to them. And so she put those together and created this banner. And I thought, okay, that will make people, it'll feel like they're back at church in a little way if I have this up. And so I preach in front of the banner, and, do announcements and everything. And then our worship leaders send in music. And so we kind of just compile it together and, make it work, I guess.
Yeah, it's the same here. We went to Zoom really quickly just because that was a platform that we'd already been using for some other strategic stuff at church. So most people were familiar with it. And it's kind of like, maybe if I think back now, I would have done some things differently, but it's the most intimate form that we've been able to find for us to really be able to connect. And this past Sunday, one person who was participating in the Zoom call lives down the street from the church. So she went to the church and sat in the courtyard while we were all on the call. So it was really kind of emotional to keep seeing like these glimpses of her sitting there underneath this big tree that's right in the middle of the courtyard that you can see outside of my office. And we unmute everybody at the end of the service for the coffee time. And she could hear the streetcars coming by where she was. It was pretty lovely. And it is good to have those touchstones of, I was going to say home. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like, is, you know, that's our space that we're all away from right now. And it's really hard. And I think all of this is really hard. So tell me, how are you doing with the filming things at home? You have one child, is that correct?
Yeah, I have a 9-month-old. I guess, well, he'll be 10 months old on Sunday.
So you basically just said, how can I take every really difficult life transition and squeeze it into 6 months of my life?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah, I mean, I wasn't really anticipating a pandemic being one of those things, but
sure.
you know, I guess if you just put it all in one, it's a little easier to manage. I don't know.
Is your 9-month-old walking yet?
He is crawling. He's
Okay.
not walking yet. We are working with him on it. I mean, he has another pastor in town right before all this gave me one of those little table thingies, you know, that makes the music and whatever. And so he is pulling up to that, and it's super cute. But yeah, I mean, he's just moving all over the place.
Yeah.
So we're really having, I mean, it used to be easy to stay home with him. Even if I was working, I could, you know, put him down on the floor in front of a toy and he couldn't go anywhere. He'd just play with that toy.
That was my favorite stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And now it's like, there's no, if he's crawling around, you know, you just have to be paying attention to him all the time.
Absolutely. So. No, I was thinking that my first one, he didn't walk until right after he turned a year old, but my second one, probably because she was watching her brother, was really early, like somewhere between 9 and 10 months. And she was falling down all the time, but just didn't care because she was so determined to chase after him. And so my husband and I were talking this morning about how great not great. No one's celebrating that 1 million people in the United States have gotten this disease, right? But in our stage of life, to have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old means they're pretty self-sufficient and can bake cookies and go for a walk and ride their bikes around. So yeah, for our friends and colleagues who have little ones, it's just such an extra layer of complexity in this time. So all of that was really to ask, do you feel like you're in a groove at all, or is it kind of day by day?
I would say it's somewhat day by day. I think emotionally it really is, you know, just every day there may be something different. I've been doing this Zoom call every week that Baptist Women in Ministry has been hosting, that, you know, they call it office hours, and people get to share every week what's going on with your life and where are you this week. And I feel almost like whiplash this week because last week I was like, oh yeah, I'm finally getting into a groove. I feel like I'm starting to have a rhythm. You know, last week on Thursday, worship was finished. So I actually got to have a weekend, and that was so nice. And then on Sunday, right after worship, I got a phone call that one of our founding church members had died. And it just kind of smacked me in the face, like, okay, we are not immune to this. And it wasn't COVID related that I know of, but, you know, just the fact that, you know, we knew that this was going to happen, that eventually the longer that you stay in this situation, somebody's going to die, something's going to happen that's kind of shake up the community. And so I don't know if it was because of this or what, but yesterday I was just crying all the time. Like something happy would happen and I would cry, something sad would happen and I would cry. And it's, you know, it just kind of, and then other days I'm like, I'm fine, you know, I could do this for, you know, or I would love to do this for 10 more months, or, you know, what have you. And one reason that I can get into a bit of a rhythm is because my husband is not working right now. So he is a teacher, and the plan was when we moved that he would substitute teach during this spring semester, get to know the schools, get to know the principals, and then he would start somewhere in the fall.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that worked for all of like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Now here we are. So, and unfortunately what we found out is that if he had signed up for a long-term sub position, he would still be getting paid right now. So, you know, that's a bummer, but he does have a contract with the county. for the fall. So if we're still doing this in some form in the fall, that's going to be more challenging because we'll both be working. So, you know,
Well, I think that is the big question that makes all of this even more complicated, is that we really don't know how long we're going to be at home, or how long large group gatherings will be banned or restricted. I was on an organizing call this morning that I really appreciated how they were reframing some of the language that I'm hearing so much locally, and we know we're all hearing it in the news, is reopening. We got to reopen America. We got to reopen our economy. And we were kind of giggling last week that Georgia is prioritizing bowling alleys, right? Like,
right.
Of all the things that are priorities right now. And I understand the impulse, like, of getting the economic engine open, and this is what we have to do. But everything I'm hearing from epidemiologist folks in our congregation, and listening to our mayor and governor have handled things really well here, I think, is pointing towards 6 months, 9 months. There are even some people who think we're going to be a year. So we're a long way from reopening, much less some normalcy, whatever that is that we're striving to return to. So I was on this organizing call this morning, statewide, talking about how faith leaders in Louisiana can come together to really create power and have some influence in this moment. All of that to say, there were a couple of folks on the call who were talking about, instead of reopening a normalcy, what does it mean to think beyond our grief? What is it that lies on the other side of this moment? Honoring that this moment is traumatic, honoring that we as a culture are grieving. And then what would we reimagine for Louisiana on the other side of this? And I thought those questions were so engaging and really allowed us to get away from just thinking about the economics, just thinking about businesses and organizations reopening. And so I wonder, are you in a position yet where you can even begin to think beyond this moment, beyond this grief and reimagine something for your community, for our country, any of it?
Yeah, it's a good question, because when I hear reopening, it just kind of is it just grinds me a little bit, because I mean, I think to talk about, bowling alleys and whatever, it just feels like, are those really the necessities? Are those the things that we really need? And so then what's behind all of this, when we know that the science is saying one thing and the politics is saying another thing, and that sort of thing. So it's hard for me to think about it without getting a little bit angry, because it just feels like there's a little bit of injustice going on in relation to, hey, if we reopen certain things, then we don't have to pay unemployment,
right?
That sort of thing. But also, I think if you had asked me this question last week, my initial answer would be like, no, I'm just not there yet. I can't. All I want to do is just be in this moment. And I did get asked, when was it? The other day, somebody asked me, is there something that I'm learning from this? And one thing I feel like I am learning is how to just be present to the moment at hand, which has not always been my strong suit. Normally I'm like, okay, let's do some visioning. And that's what I thought coming into the church, that's what I would be doing, is like, let's do some visioning for the future and what have you. But now, it's like, well, the future is going to look very different and from day to day. And, thankfully, our governor has kind of rolled out, he hasn't even said what reopening will look like. He said, here's what needs to happen before we can even have this conversation. And so, I mean, one of those things is the whole, we have to go 14 days being in a decline. Mm-hmm. And so, we are not there yet. We're not anywhere near that. And so I can kind of say to myself, all right, when I see that first number drop or even just stabilize, okay, I know I've got a couple weeks that we need to be thinking about this. Yeah. But, I am always thinking about, okay, when we do, because I'm seeing some other states. My brother-in-law and his wife live in Tennessee, and they live in Memphis. So in their county, they're talking about, they're not reopening yet, and here's kind of the phases of reopening. And one of the first things says, 25% capacity at churches. And so I started thinking about that. And I'm like, well, I guess that gives you kind of a good answer as to how many people you can have. But how do you decide? I mean, most churches I don't think are filling up to 100% capacity on Sunday, but our church is a small building.
Yeah.
And so we are probably at about 75% capacity on a Sunday morning.
So that means if your
So,
sanctuary seats 1,000 people, then you could have 250 in worship?
mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So then how do you tell the other 750,
Yeah.
no, you can't come? So, and then I know for my community, like there are a number of people that live in retirement homes, and they will be unable to come because retirement homes will still have the closures. I mean, in every state that's doing this reopening thing, that's one of the rules, is that the nursing homes and retirement homes still need to be very highly regulated in terms of who can come and go and that sort of thing. So, I mean, just been thinking about what does that mean for those people, because like I told you earlier, I mean, we are not really set up to live stream yet. So we've got to be thinking, how can we still have, if we have people coming in, still have a service where the people who don't feel comfortable coming and the people who, you know, can't come because of where they live or what have you, or their, pre-existing conditions or something like that, how they can still be a part of all of that. And so I guess that's more the practical. I mean, the reimagining, how do we do things together? People are still going to be afraid to do physical touch, and
Yeah.
people are all going to have a different level of comfort. And so, I mean, my husband and I, we talk about this. We go on walks every day, and we talk about, when we get back together, the Sunday school classrooms we have, you can't have social distancing in there.
Right.
So our Sunday school will probably have to combine and all be in the fellowship hall. And then, maybe each week we have a different teacher teach, or they figure out. And so then, we kind of develop a closer community, because people who were originally in little pods might be able to get together. So I think, that may be a nice thing that's going to come out of this, is even for a temporary time period, we're all kind of walking together in a way and learning from each other. So, we've had our Sunday school classes, because we just have one Zoom account right now, have not met at the same time. Like one's met at 9:30 on Sunday, one's met at 1, that sort of thing. And so the teachers are actually getting to go to each other's Sunday school classes. And yeah, like so I think they're getting to even learn from each other about, oh, this person does this in Sunday school, I think I should incorporate that into my class, and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, I think it's been really important to me that we not just try to recreate every single thing that we were doing already with some Zoom parallel to it. And it's been important for me as a leader to be really clear about what my role is and what it's not. And reminding myself, like, other people can set Zoom accounts up too. Other people can figure this out too. And that it's important to trust the congregation. And I've just been delighted at how my congregation has really risen to this moment. In part, for anybody who has been watching these conversations, I'm in New Orleans, so I'm going to reference Katrina a lot. Katrina was such a separation of community and people being kind of lost to each other for a time. So I know it has been really meaningful to my folks to be able to have a medium like this. I mean, I miss hugging people so much. I can't imagine a world in which I'm not hugging people. So I don't know what the future looks like for me. But at least we can see each other. At least we can have these conversations. Now, I've been in my setting for almost 7 years, and you've only been there for a few months at this point. So I wonder, with so much of that early pastoral ministry being just getting established and getting to know people and getting their names right and getting their stories, how are you doing that with distance? What approaches are you taking?
Yeah, I mean, that's been really hard. And I think, one thing that I've been doing is, and I spoke to a friend about this recently, but I feel like I'm sharing more personal stories in sermons than I would normally, because we're still getting to know each other. And so I think about some people who I've heard kind of criticize pastors who only talk about themselves in sermons. And so I'm trying to balance that with, well, first of all, I'm not seeing everybody else's experience through this. So if I'm trying to talk about this, this time of physical distancing and whatever else, like I only have my experience to draw from right now. And also, I only, like they don't know me yet. So I need to kind of tell some stories to get to where we feel like we're starting to get to know each other. So there's that level in the sermons where I kind of have to give myself some grace and realize, yeah, okay, maybe if I were a pastor who'd been there 7 years, I wouldn't feel comfortable with just continually sharing stories about myself and that sort of thing. But because this is new, it helps people to relate to me.
Yeah.
I've been doing, Zoom has been very helpful because I've been able to do kind of what I've called front porch conversations, where I just kind of sit on Zoom for a couple hours, and whoever gets on, I sit there and talk with them, and
that's great.
that sort of thing. Emails have been a good way. And interestingly, people who I don't know, but I assume might not have emailed me otherwise, or like sitting at home and like, man, maybe I'll just email my pastor. And during the pastoral prayer, most every Sunday I've said, hey, please email me if you have anything you'd like me to pray about, because we normally do prayer requests during the service, so people actually speak up their prayer requests, and we don't do that when we're either live streaming or when we have a pre-recorded service, because anybody could watch it and we don't want to share personal requests with just anybody on the internet. So I've gotten more emails from people than I did. We even had prayer cards when we were meeting together, and people would fill out the prayer card and then put it in my box. But I've gotten more emails than I did prayer cards. And so, that's been a good way of getting to know people, and just, trying to call a couple people a week and that sort of thing. And it's tough because on a normal week, you'd see, 150 people or more. And, there's just no way, being a solo pastor, that I can connect with 150 people every week the same way that I would if I were standing at the door after a sermon or after a worship service. So it's incremental for sure, a lot more incremental than it would be if we were business as usual. But one other thing, my church about 20 years ago, almost exactly, had a fire. And so a lot of the people who are members of the church now were there when the church burned, and they had to worship in the local firehouse. They worshiped in the local synagogue. They, just different places. And so this is a really resilient congregation, and they know how to look for hope outside of a devastating circumstance, and they know how to live in kind of what I talked about one Sunday as like the diaspora. They know how to live separated from each other, not having their one common landing ground. And so I think that's a really, that's an inspiring place to be, knowing that my church knows how to overcome things like this. And so there is anxiety, but there's not as much anxiety because we know what this looks like. We know, not really a pandemic, but a fire. The building burned down, and for 2 years they didn't have a building, know. So.
Well, and so you touching on anxiety makes me also think about what I continue to say is going to be the next, I'm not the only one, but the next phase of this is we're feeding into what was already called the loneliness epidemic. And you do have a lot of people who are feeling trapped and isolated and depressed and anxious. So it seems logical that a mental health dimension to this much time away from people is part of what we're going to start seeing. And so I wonder if you have thoughts on how faith leaders in particular, we're clearly not mental health care providers, so I'm very clear about what that role is. So it's not my role to be a therapist to my congregation, but as a leader, as a clergy person, what do you think our role might be into speaking into that reality if you're seeing widespread mental health issues from this much time, people being isolated from each other?
Hmm. Yeah, I really make an effort, particularly in worship and in my sermons. I think about what's the thing that I need to hear today, and I try to preach that and understand that that's probably what everybody else is needing to hear too. And so that's kind of my primary place because I know the most people are tuning in to that than anything else. And I have I have a group of ladies that meets every Tuesday, and I would imagine the average age is probably 80, and they're all figuring out how to meet on Zoom, which is
Yeah,
pretty amazing.
it is.
And they talk a lot about that, about the loneliness of just, a lot of them are widows, um, and just what that's like to see even in their own communities, couples that are walking around and they don't have anybody with them. And, so just being present for them. And I even realized, so last week we were coming on to the end of the book study that we had been doing before all this started. And they asked, normally they don't meet during the summer. And so they were talking about, do we want to continue meeting during the summer? What do we want to do? And I spoke up and said, this really is the highlight of my week. And I think for them, hearing that really meant a lot. And so just trying to remind them that, we're all in this together, as cheesy and High School Musical-y as that sounds. I
Yeah.
mean, like, I'm feeling the same way they are. And this is, coming to their Bible study every week is not a burden for me. It's something that I really enjoy doing and that I really need to feel like, I mean, I could be Zooming with all my best friends from Louisville, and we do that some too, but having these people who are in the same town as I am and who are going to be our community when we get on whatever the other side of this looks
Right.
like. So for me, it's about kind of just speaking to them what's on my heart and hoping that that communicates to them as well. And even saying things like last week, I was writing my sermon and found out that our family reunion had gotten postponed till next year. And I said in my sermon, I said, look, I am feeling broken today.
Mm.
I am grieving the loss of this event that I thought was going to happen, where I was going to get to introduce my son to my family and all. And I think that's important for me to say that, to say it's okay for me to feel broken and it's okay for you to feel broken. I
Absolutely.
even, I'm diagnosed with anxiety. So I even said that in a sermon one time. I'm like, I have anxiety, and here's, what how this is presenting itself in this way. And I think just normalizing it for people can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I fully agree. And I think that that this is a great moment for doing that, for normalizing any language around mental health and our own care. And then also modeling vulnerability. I think for the previous generation of pastors, there was this professional voice that they were to put on and not be vulnerable, to really step into a role and inhabit that role and not be human even.
Hmm.
And I don't care to do that. I'm not good at that.
Yeah.
I often feel like I'm the most reluctant pastor. There are 1,000 people that should have been called instead of me, and yet here I am. Somehow I still keep ending up in pastoral ministry, even with 2 or 3 different attempts to try to jump ship and go
Hmm.
nonprofit over the past 20 years in my life. So here I am. And so there's something about me that has been called to this moment. And I'm not called to be who those guys were in the 20th century. I'm called to be myself and really
Hmm.
fully, unabashedly myself. So I think my best moments in the past 8 weeks or whatever it's been now online have been when I would have been able to say, I'm really sad that I'm staring at a green dot on my computer instead of
Hmm.
being in your presence. And I'm really sad that we're still doing this week after week and we don't know when it's going to end. And I think just to be able to model truth telling
Hmm.
is essential, because I mean, how heartbreaking that for decades churches weren't really the place for telling truth. If they were a
Right.
place for like modeling citizenship and propriety and establishing cultural norms, but not like aspiring to live our truest and best selves. So maybe for me, that's something that I hope comes out of this time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think you're totally right to be telling stories. Yeah.
right. No, sorry. My husband said to me last week, he goes, you're Brene Browning the heck out of these pandemic sermons. And I was like, what do you mean? That's, but I mean, I was definitely very happy that he said that, or honored, I guess. But
Yeah.
he said, you're being vulnerable in a way that I've never heard a male pastor be vulnerable.
Sure.
And I know that that's definitely, there are male pastors that are vulnerable and that are being vulnerable during this time. So not to criticize anybody, but just that it's a place, I think, where female pastors get to shine in some ways right now, that we do have a little bit more of a nurturing bone in our body. Maybe we're not the only ones who can nurture, and but this is a time where vulnerability really makes sense to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we've had to do because, my goodness, I mean, if you're going to be a woman in ministry, you're going to have some slashes and, I mean, you're going to get hurt. And so you have a lot that you can bring to the table. And yeah, so I just think it's really, it's been a great moment to just say, I'm just going to put all the windows down or what have you, and just let's go. Like, let's be on this together and figure out, if I'm feeling it, you're probably feeling it too. And if I name it, then it's easier for you to name it,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we were already thinking that there's been a generational shift because there's been all the anxiety of the hand wringing about how do churches get millennials to stay engaged. And I hope that maybe that's one of the conversations that we don't have after this is over. Like maybe there's been a shift in that, because part of what I'm finding with being forced online right now is the people who want to come really want to come. The people who want to participate need it, or seeking it out, or are hungry for it. And there's something exciting to me about having if it's a smaller congregation, but a deeply engaged, committed people who want to go deeper with each other and tell the truth about their lives, and not just be committed to taking care of each other, but really participating in some kind of collective action for good in our communities and in our world. I am just totally there for that. That excites me. That makes me really hopeful about the future. And I feel like my congregation was already on that path to begin with. And perhaps there's something about this moment that's going to magnify all of that for us. I always say at funerals, it's one of the rare moments when everybody in the room knows what really matters and what doesn't. And that moment doesn't last very long, but at least for the day of the service, for probably the large group, and then for the weeks around the death, for people who are closer, that moment of clarity lasts. And I feel like we're in that kind of extended, prolonged moment of clarity as churches right now. I'm just thinking that some of us are talking about how do we innovate, how do we change, and your situation is just so different and specific to you. How do you introduce yourself? How do you foster community? How do you stick with it? And then with patience and grace, finding out what's on the other side. So it sounds like you're doing a really wonderful job where you are. They're lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting because it's like you just jump in the deep end, for lack of a better cliche, I suppose. But I mean, you don't get much of a chance to get to know people, but you just figure it out. And I think people have been very grateful. They had a 2-year interim before I came, which I think was good for them, but also they were done. They were so done with being in the interim that, everybody was just so glad that I was there. And, I mean, just every Sunday, everybody was like, oh, that was the best sermon. That was the best sermon. That was the best, and then now here we are, and it's like, okay, guys, let's see how I can lead. I mean,
for sure.
And I think there's a lot of grace in still being kind of in the honeymoon period, but this is, never how you really imagined your honeymoon going.
Yeah. No,
It's like,
definitely
couples who they get married, they go on their honeymoon, and then they find out that one of them has a terrible disease, which of course our terrible disease is a pandemic,
not. Yeah.
and so then you've got to figure out how to navigate that together. But it's been an opportunity for me, when a church has a really long interim, they learn how to be pretty self-sufficient. And
Yeah.
so, this is a church that is self-sufficient. They know how to lead themselves. They know how to do things themselves. And so it's been an opportunity for me to now figure out where my place is and not just be like the one who preaches while everybody else does everything else. Like I
Right.
get to kind of feel my way into leadership, particularly because, I don't know if it's because of my age or what. I mean, everybody says like, we're so glad we have a young pastor who knows how to do technology. And it's like, well, maybe I know some people my age who don't know how to do technology, but, like the fact that I do have some giftedness what I did for CBF was all online content. And when I was in high school, I was on my high school news station. So I just happened to know how to do video editing,
Oh,
not
that's great.
well, but I know how to do it, somewhat. So it's like just kind of dusting off some old skills that I had. And um, gosh, I feel for churches right now who are still in the interim during this and not knowing when they're going to have a pastor, especially, I'm a solo pastor. I have a part-time music minister, but, you know, for a church that would only have a solo pastor and be in the interim, this has got to be a tough, tough time for that. So, I'd rather be getting to know people during something like this where people just have time on their hands
Right.
than to be, um, in a church that's in the interim and just trying to figure out, or even be for myself, still be in the search process and be like, well, every day that they tell me that this is going to last longer is one more day that I'm still searching.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, so we've both acknowledged that some of our days are good days and some of our days are bad days. On the days when you feel like there's a practice that you are cultivating to help keep you centered, what is that practice, and what do those days look like?
Mm. We go on walks almost every day. Those have been really my saving grace through all of this, just kind of getting out of the house and even, getting to know my neighborhood a little bit and getting somewhat lost in the neighborhood has been helpful. And every day, you notice a different plant that you didn't see before, or even, some weeds that have purple or yellow color to them, and you just realize, spring is happening. Oh, and one day, so one of the streets near our house is it's a divided road, and then in the middle they've got these big beautiful trees. And one day all the blossoms were just dead, winter or whatever. And then all of a sudden, the next day, we come walk and like there's all these blossoms on the trees
Wow.
and it just looks so beautiful. And it just reminded me that, yeah, we're going through a hard time. And sometimes it feels like we're in the dead of winter, but then there's life the next day. And so that's been really helpful. And then just being able to kind of talk and process things with my husband has been nice. And so, and also because our son is only 9 months old, we can just put him in the car seat and he just walk, we push the stroller and he's not over there like, I want to get out, I want to
Yeah.
walk. He's just like, okay, I'll play with my little teething ring, I don't care, whatever. So that's been really helpful. We drink a lot more tea than we used to, just kind of slow down, drink some tea. Every morning I come upstairs with my cup of tea and I light a candle and I sit here and I just breathe. I do the things that everybody thinks pastors are doing all the time,
Yeah.
just like meditating and saying the Lord's Prayer and that sort of thing. But that has really grounded me. So, this morning I came with a little bit more anxiety than normal. So I sat there in silence and just breathed in and out until I kind of felt my heart rate going down. And those have been the things that have really grounded me, I think.
Yeah. I have never been
great at cultivating a lot of those meditative practices on my own. My mind is really, really busy. And maybe I probably, if I was born in a different generation, would have gotten an ADD diagnosis, I suspect. So I find guided meditation to be really, really helpful. And I finally made the jump from the free subscription to the Calm app to the paid one, and unlocked all of these remarkable guided meditations that are on there. And some that are for anxiety specifically, not just mindfulness and cultivating those practices, but truly about paying attention to what you're saying, like your heart rate, and it's up, and knowing when it's up. And I've found that to be really helpful, because my anxiety has been sometimes through the roof. My sleep has been really disrupted. And so I've, even in the night, it's like, it does what it says it's going to do. So if you pull your phone out in the middle of the night and turn the app on, it's like, oh, are you having trouble getting back to sleep? Yes, I am. It's 3 in the morning. And so they have guided meditations. I did one last night that, and I never make it through the whole thing. They're just brilliant and lovely. So that's been a new addition in my life. And we're doing a lot of bird watching. I think I talk about that every week when I do these. We saw, Nathan, are you around? No. I was going to ask him. It's a ruby-breasted grosbeak, a red-breasted, a rose-breasted grosbeak. So when I was on this call this morning, supposed to be paying attention to this very important statewide thing that we're going to do with the governor, this bird comes to the feeder, and I'm like, oh, I've got to get the book out and find out what this bird is. So that's been a big part of what's been centering for me. And also bringing a lot of joy and play into our life. You know, having kids in the house, I think, automatically brings a level of laughter and play. Hello, my 11-year-old's walking by right now. So you've mentioned things that bring you peace, but what about things that bring you joy, things that really bring some levity as well to your days? Where are you finding those moments?
Yeah, I mean, my 9-month-old, for sure, he just loves to laugh, and he's gotten to the point now where if you put a camera in front of his face, he will not smile. But so I can't really prove it to people. But any other time, you know, I mean, I've my office now is upstairs in one of our upstairs bedrooms, and so he'll be downstairs, and I'll come down the stairs, and all of a sudden he just gets this big smile on his face, like, Mommy's coming downstairs. And so, you know, it just brings me so much joy to watch him play and to see him, like, he's a good self-soother, which is nice. And so we can put him down in the crib for his nap, and he won't go straight to sleep, but he'll, you know, so we get to listen to him. And actually my office is right above his nursery, so I can hear him where he's just going la 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 la, and then, you know, blowing raspberries and different things, and then all of a sudden you don't hear anything anymore, and you're like, oh, he fell asleep. You know,
my first child was not that way, and I remember almost hating people who would describe that experience. So you were very fortunate to have a child who can be that chill and lull himself to sleep. My second one was able to do it, but the first one we were not sleeping through the night until about 11 months old, I think. So.
Oh wow. Yeah, I told my husband really early on. You know, he said something. This was, you know, when he was just a couple weeks old, and my husband was like, "Oh my God, he only got 4 hours of sleep, or he only slept 4 hours straight last night." And I was like, "Don't tell people that, because there are people who would kill to have 4 hours of sleep." You know, so we had to learn not to, you know, don't say all that. But yeah, I mean, that just listening to him. Oh, he can sit up in his crib now, and so he has started at the end of naps. If he's just done napping, he gets up and he just sits up in his crib and goes, ah, bah, you know. And so then you walk in, and he's just sitting there like he, and he's so proud of himself because he figured out how to do this thing that he didn't know how to do before. And that brings me so much joy. And so, yeah, definitely, you know, it's hard being a parent during all of this, especially being a new parent. And it is both sad and happy at the same time, because I come in and he's done this new thing and we don't get to share it with anybody except for, you know, on Facebook or something. So that's really hard because, you know, he would have grandparents coming to visit by now, and other, people from the church are wanting to be a part of his life and that sort of thing, and they can't. But for us, it's a joy just getting to spend our days with him and watch how he's growing, and he's so silly. And it also reminds me, like, he has no idea that this is going on.
That's right.
So that's kind of the benefit for us of having a 9-month-old as opposed to like 11 and 14, or that's how old you said they were, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's where we are.
Yeah. So I mean, every day having to explain to them, like, this is where we are and this is why you can't see your kids, and dealing with their grief. Like, he has no grief around this.
Sure.
So
that's a wonderful gift for your family to be able to really tuck in, and especially at a time of transition that could have been really disruptive if you were jumping into a new congregation full time, and your husband's not student teaching, but substitute teaching. I mean, that it could have been more stressful and chaotic than it's been. So maybe there are some real gifts to this slowness, even though it's unexpected and probably not what you had prepared yourself for. Well, thank you for your time. Thanks for reaching out and connecting and making some space in the middle of what I'm sure is a busy week with lots of Zoom calls and everything else that you have going on. It's really great to hear from you and hear what's going on. And I'll be interested to check in with you a couple months down the road and find out how are things going, starting a new pastorate from your upstairs bedroom.
Yeah, well, thank you. This has been great.